I have a story about the Fina. The Fina, the great warrior poets of Ireland and Scotland. To join the Fina, you had to complete a number of tasks, and if you failed at one, you could not join. You had to run through the forest with your hair braided in a particular way, and if one braid fell out, you could not join the band. You had to balance on the end of a sword, and at the same time you had to recite poetry to the world. Poetry you learned by heart, many books of poetry. You had to balance underneath a low pole. You had to jump as high as you can, and you were then buried up to your waist in soil, given a sword and no shield, and you had to fight the many men that came to attack you. And if you were marked with just one mark, you could not join the Fina. The Fina were led by many men, but the most famous of those was Finn McCool. Finn McCool, the powerful man of the Fina. There are many stories told about Finn McCool, but they are not for now. Finn McCool had a son, Oisin, the little deer. Oisin was a part of the band, but he was famous for his music, his poetry, and his singing. Now one day, all the Fina were lying on a beach after, they say, some battle, which we will not go into at the moment. They were relaxing in the sunshine. And suddenly, one of their men stood up and said, "Look, look, out across the sea. There was a shape moving, a white shape." The other men stood up. It was not a boat. It was moving too fast. It was moving towards them. And as they looked, they saw it was a magnificent white stallion. But it was not the horse that caught the men's attention. It was what was on the horse. There was a lady sitting bolt upright and riding without reins, without any help. She had a beautiful long white dress on, and she had fabulous red hair that rolled down her shoulders and down her back. She came charging across the sea and landed at the beach. The men looked up at her. "I am Niamh. I come from the land of Tir na Nog. I seek Oisin of the Fina." All the men looked around, and all the men said, I'm Oisin, I'm Oisin. It's me. You found him. Niamh laughed and said, I cannot believe you are all Oisin. And just then, from the back of the crowd, there came the sound of a harp. And making his way through all the men was Oisin, playing his harp and humming. I am Oisin. Niamh's eye met his and said, "You are indeed Oisin. It is true what they say." Oisin smiled. "You have found me. What do you want of me, madam?" And Niamh held her breath and said, "I have come to take you to the land of Tir na Nog. You are to join me there, in the land of the forever young. We can live together and be together there. Will you come with me? Will you come with me, Oisin?" And Oisin, without a moment's hesitation, said, "Yes, madam, I will come with you." Then McCool looked at them both and said, "Oisin, you cannot leave me. We need you as our band. You cannot go with this lady to Tir na Nog." "I must go," said Oisin. "I must go." But I promise you this. In 7 years' time, I will return. I will return. I promise you. I promise you, as a member of the Fina, I will keep my word. And with that, he gathered his other things and leapt up onto the back of the horse behind Niamh, and the horse turned and rode out across the sea, and Finn McCool sighed, because he knew he would never see his son again. Niamh and her new companion made their way across the sea and went to Oisin and Niamh, the land of the forever young. And indeed, it was as magical as people say it was. No one aged, there were no arguments, there was anything anyone wanted. Indeed, Oisin and Niamh eventually had children there and started a family, 2 children. But as the end of the 7 years was approaching, something came over Oisin. Something he knew he had to do. He had to return to the land of Ireland to see his father, to see the other men, to see the Fina. It was his word. You cannot return. You cannot leave me, said Niamh. You cannot. But he was not to be dissuaded from this. And Niamh realized that that was so. You must take my horse, the white horse you came with me. It will know the way back to Ireland. Will you do that for me? I will, said Oisin. The horse was brought, and Oisin mounted it and set off towards the sea. And as he did so, he turned, and there was Niamh, a tear running down her face. I will not see you ever again, she said. I'll be back. I'll be back. I must just see my father. You know that. Promise me one thing, said Niamh. Do not touch the land of Ireland at all. Do not touch it. And as she said that, Oisin had kicked the horse and was running away. What does she mean? What does she mean? But the moment was gone, and he disappeared off, out over the water. When he got to Ireland, Oisin recognised the hills, the lakes, the land, but not the people. They were different, everything else was the same, but the people seemed smaller, greyer, less fierce, less Irish. And he went around saying, I seek Fina, I seek Finn McCall, and people would laugh at him and say, you talk of people from legend. Let thee gone. And Oisin didn't know what to say. They're not legend. It's my father. It's his men. But no one knew where they were. And the people, they just laughed. I know who will help me, he thought. Niamh. She will know what has happened here. I will go back to Oisin and Niamh. I will go back. And he set off towards the sea, and as he was doing so, he saw 2 men pushing a huge boulder out of the path he was on. And without thinking, he leant from his horse and put his hand under the stone. And as he did so, the back of his hand just grazed the land of Ireland. In that moment, 700 years fell upon him, and he grew old and tired and curled over and grey-haired and wizened. And he looked at his hands and thought, it is true what they say. 1 year in Oisin and Niamh is 100 years in the real world. and he knew what he had to do. Fetch a scribe, he said. Fetch a scribe. Now we must write down the stories I have. A scribe was brought, a monk. Oisin spent time telling that man his stories, Finn McCool, stories about himself, stories about the Fianna, on all that had gone on in those days. And as he finished his last story, he died. It is said by some that that monk was St. Patrick, and it is said that those stories are those stories that we hear now about Finn McCool and the Fianna and Oisin and the great warriors of Ireland and Scotland. Thank you. That is my story.